Hey, welcome back to another great edition of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, editor-at-large at Mississippi Today, also editorial cartoonist at Mississippi Today as well. And I tell you what, you want to see more great Mississippi Stories episodes, or you want to see this one again, you can go to MississippiToday.org. And on top of that, we have great coverage as well. You've probably seen it on the way to the beach. And if you're like into scouting, you might even spent the night on it. Yeah, it's that big, giant gray gunboat that you see right off the causeway in Mobile, Alabama. It's the U.S.S. Alabama. It is one of America's last battleships. And I tell you what, the other day, and I've got to hold this up and show it to you. Over Christmas, I took some time off. I decided I'd play around on the iPad. So I did a little sketch on the iPad of the U.S.S. Alabama. It's one of my favorite ships. I just think it's really an impressive museum. They've done a great job with it. I wanted to see if I could draw it. And I drew it. I posted it on a Facebook page called Museum Ships, which, of course, highlights ships like the U.S.S. Alabama. And I got a really nice message from our guest today. It's Matthew McCluney. He's from Gautier, Mississippi. So he is a Mississippian, even though he does, cross the border every day and go over and work in Alabama. But I wanted to talk to him today a little bit because my first thought when I was sitting there talking to him was like, how do you get a cool job being a curator on a battleship? You know, you're working in the curation department and helping preserve this incredible 80-year-old piece of history that has fought not only in the Atlantic, but also in the Pacific, was a big part of the victory in World War II. And here we are 80 years out from the beginning of World War II, Pearl Harbor Day, which was just last month. So I just thought this would be a great episode. And Matthew, thanks for joining us today. Like I said, I think you've got one of the coolest jobs on the planet, but maybe that's just because like I'm a 50-year-old dad who likes that kind of stuff. So go figure.
Thanks for having me. It's a treat.
Well, thanks. I hope you feel that way when we're done with all this, but, hey, I got to tell you, number one, I've seen you on some of the videos. I was very impressed. I mean, like, obviously you were on a video, and I got to tell everybody how this kind of got started. I had back surgery, and when you're in that narcotic phase, you start binging YouTube. It's like finding videos, and I got sucked into the U.S.S. New Jersey's videos, and you made a cameo in one of them, and you were talking about the B-52 that is in the U.S.S. Alabama Battleship Memorial Park's parking lot, more or less. It's the giant bomber that has been in American service since, about 1952. And your knowledge on it was incredible. I mean, you knew obviously the stuff. So obviously you were a history buff probably growing up, and that's kind of what led you into this business, wasn't it?
Yeah. So just to clarify, my official title is museum technician.
Thank you.
I work for the curator.
You're right. I'm not. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to give you a promotion there. And I do apologize. I don't want you to lose your job over this interview, but no, I meant to say you worked in the curation department. So
right.
Yeah.
But, So when I was a kid, both my parents had older parents. Their parents were World War II veterans. And so both of them flew C-47s during World War II. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I had an interest in this park, is because we have a C-47 on the property. But that's where my initial interest came from. I used to watch the History Channel back when all they played was, World War II documentaries. And I'd watch it with my grandpa, and we'd sit there and we'd talk, and he'd tell me about it. He's from Laurel, Mississippi. So we're just kind of all Mississippi born and raised. And so that's where the interest started. And, from there, I was sitting at a job one time with a guy I work with today, David Culpepper, and he had been to the ship 1,000 times since he was a kid. He loved it. And I didn't know much about the ship, to be quite honest. I actually wasn't aware that they had 16-inch guns on anything but an Iowa class at that time. I'd never been to the ship. I didn't know anything about her. And we were talking, and he says, that would be a dream job to work there. And I said, well, I don't know about working there, but have you ever thought of volunteering? And he kind of stopped, and he says, I never thought about it. And so when I saw him at work the next day, we were working in Biloxi at the time. I saw him at work the next day, and he said, well, I emailed everyone in the park. because he was excited. So he emails everybody. And so our curator, Shane McCluney, emails him back and he says, don't email everybody, but we'll be glad to have you come in and volunteer. And so Dave started in what is Damage Control Central back in 2015, February 2015. And I was in college at the time, working on my bachelor's. And so Dave is coming in every day for work, and he's telling me this amazing stuff he's doing, and he's recreating these original drawings from the ship and everything as a volunteer because he has a background in art. And I say, okay, well, I really want to do this, but I want to get the semester out of the way. So in May of 2015, I started volunteering on Battleship Alabama. And I was kind of drawn by the aircraft. Well, at the time, the aircraft weren't in as much need as the ship was. Yeah. And so Shane McCluney, our curator, kind of said, well, we've got some projects on board. Would you like to help with that? I said, absolutely, any way I can help. And so that's when I started. Me and Dave started volunteering back in 2015. And then in October 2016, our executive director, Major General Janet Cobb, offered Dave and I a job, and we accepted. And now, here we are. We're both still here. And so that's kind of how we got here. And just a quick aside for that B-52 video, I have to tell you, I got the engines wrong. And I got the crew wrong. I forgot the tail gunner. And I don't even want to try to guess at what those engines are, by the way, because I got a lot of B-52 guys that really lit into me. So,
that's the beauty of the internet. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. It's got autocorrect on the internet, man. It'll come back and hit you. Like for instance, I'm sure. Since I goofed up your title, I figured I'm not much better on that. But you're right on that. I thought your B-17 video was good too. I grew up loving airplanes. I was the same way. Mm-hmm. I lived near Lockheed, so whenever the planes would fly over, I'd look up in the sky like a meerkat. I was like, oh, like that. And a friend of mine, just kind of as an aside, a friend of mine just bought a C-47 that actually flew in D-Day. And so, yeah, I think they bought it from Richard Branson. It was in Virgin. They were using it with Virgin. They're about to repaint it and get it totally on that. So that's really cool. The Alabama, like I said, I've been coming to it for years. Drug my kids when they were little up and down the ladders and did the scout thing and got to hear the one dad who snored louder than the 16-inch guns and, got the whole experience. And one of the things that was really cool about the overnight trips was that you could literally have free reign of the ship and you could go into all, obviously there's some areas that y'all have closed off, but it was still neat to get to go through it with a fine-tooth comb on that. And I went back recently with my youngest son, and I really noticed that y'all have been busy. I mean, you have done an awful lot of work restoring different rooms, different areas. And you mentioned, David, it's like you two are like the dynamic duo. It seems like you work together on a lot of different projects, and y'all have really done a fantastic job. I know you've got when you first walk on the ship, you've got a really nice display set up on that. So I just wanted to say, good job. The ship looks really great.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. It's not just me and Dave, obviously. So our jobs have we've taken on more responsibilities lately. Yeah. With doing the YouTube channel, and we're working more on exhibits now. And when I say exhibits, more recently, like we're in the middle of doing an ordnance exhibit right now, and all the display cases on main deck when you first walk in, Dave and I have gone through and revamped all those under direction of our curator to lay it out and get a timeline going where it makes sense when you walk in and you're kind of walk through the history of the ship. And it culminates with a new theater video, first new video we've had in the theater since probably, or mid 90s, I think, and which is a whole history of the battleship, which you can see on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, I watched it last night. You did a lot of research on that. I noticed in the credits that that must have been fun to do a lot of the digging.
So it's funny because I did a lot of digging through a lot of Navy documentation and through a lot of the documentation we have from the logs from the ship. And right as I got finished writing it, I found that in our archives, we have a whole history of the ship written by Captain Goggins, which was the last war captain of U.S.S. Alabama. Yeah. And I thought, boy, this would have been handy about 2 months ago. So yeah, there was a lot of research. I researched that. I wrote it. Our curator, Shane McCluney, narrated it.
Yeah.
And Dave did the sound design on it. Dave has a history in sound design. So he did a lot of the things you hear, the music, the sound effects, that kind of thing he did. And he helped with the audio and everything. And I did a lot of the heavy editing. And Dave helped me do what we call, we mine the archives. We go to the National Archives and we mine for footage that's publicly available. So, but Dave and I have worked together a lot on restoration. This compartment we're sitting in is the chart house, and this was Dave and I's first start to finish project as hired employees. Was this compartment back in 2017? We finished up in here.
Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry, Matthew.
I was going to say it was a team effort, because what happens first is the maintenance department came in. Well, first Dave and I came in and pulled any artifacts out of the space that needed to be restored, and then the maintenance department comes in and they use something called a needle scaler or a needle gun to knock off all the old paint and rust. And then what they did is they painted all the bulkheads in the deck. And so when they're done, then Dave and I came in and we restored all the furniture that's in here, the chart table that we're sitting on right now, the radars, the radios, everything inside. All that was done by Dave and myself, or by Will Byers, who does a lot of the restoration on more of the micro artifacts. So we have a board in here that is for controlling the degaussing of the ship, which is what makes the ship invisible to magnetic mines and torpedoes. Mm-hmm. It runs a charge through the hull. We took that completely down off the bulkhead and took it down to Willie, and he completely restored the whole setup, which was amazing, because I don't think it had been really kept up since 1946, 1947. So there's a lot of moving parts to restoration. We work hand in hand with the maintenance department as much as we possibly can. They have their plates full too, because their job isn't just to make sure these bulkheads are painted. In fact, we've been doing a lot of that lately, but they also have to make sure there's not water coming in the ship. You have to make sure that she's structurally sound. They have to make sure the plumbing situation, just everything, lighting, all sorts of stuff. So they're inundated on an average day. And so it's really a team effort, and we lean on our volunteers a lot too. They do a lot. That's how I started. That's how Dave started. And we still have volunteers today. We don't have a lot, but we have a very, very good crew.
Well, let me ask you this, because like I said, when they build ships like that, particularly, the keel was laid in February of 1940, and it was launched in 1942. So it's an 80-year-old ship. They were not designed to last in salt water for 80 years. And so y'all got the ship in 1965. It was in mothballs for 20 years, and it was brought to y'all. In fact, it's a great campaign. One of my friends, Marie, posted on my Facebook page about how when she was a little girl, she donated the dimes, and she has a lifetime pass to come visit the Alabama. But like I said, so you're fighting a battle against saltwater, and like you said, water coming in, and you've got an 80-year-old piece of steel that you're trying to maintain. How difficult is that like you said, it sounds like it's just a daily thing to try to keep it, because this is a very big ship. Y'all have a lot of territory to cover.
She's the third largest battleship America ever built. This class, a South Dakota class ship, and Alabama is the fourth in the class, the last in the class to be built. But I don't want to make it sound like constantly having to repair holes. That's not the situation.
Right.
We run a cathodic protection system through the ship, which helps to lessen galvanic corrosion and that kind of thing with dissimilar metals sitting in salt water. That's how you make a battery, right?
Right.
And that's how you do corrosion, is dissimilar metals and then salt water. So we have a cathodic protection system in place, one. Two, we're fairly far up in the bay, and the salinity is fairly low up here.
Yeah.
So that's another big factor that helps us out a lot. Back in the 90s, I don't remember the exact year, but there were some hull problems with the ship, and that resulted in the building of a cofferdam around the vessel. Now, the purpose of that was so that at any point, if there needed to be any hull repairs made, we can pump the cofferdam out, and then you have access to the hull to make repairs.
Oh, yeah.
And, really anywhere you're going to have problems is usually around what they call the wind water line, where you have that wave action. So you have friction from the waves, and then you constantly have the tides going up and down, giving it salt water, then oxygen, even though the salinity is low. And so that oxygen is what obviously causes oxidation. And so below the water line, where there's not as much oxygen, or below the portions of the hull that are under the mud, don't get any oxygen. So no oxygen, no oxidation. And we've had hull surveys done, and they say, I believe the words used were, the paint looks almost new down below. So she's in really good shape there. So, and you'll notice that other ships have started going to a cofferdam method to help preserve their vessels. U.S.S. North Carolina just recently built a cofferdam. They had actually visited down here to check out our setup at one point to see how well it was working for us.
Yeah, it really, like you said, the ship is incredible. I know I used to live in Houston, Texas, and visited the U.S.S. Texas quite a bit. And of course, it is, I guess, the oldest museum ship that's out there. And I know they're about to move it into dry dock to finally patch some really serious issues on that. I just was curious because, I mean, it's like I said, y'all have done such a great job maintaining the ship throughout the years that it looks really good. But I also know it's an incredibly big ship. So I was just kind of curious that y'all always have got something to do on that. Anybody who's ever restored an old car, like a muscle car or a car from the 60s, knows that sometimes getting parts is hard. And I was just kind of fascinated when you were talking about restoring, like, for instance, that chart room, you were getting, pieces that were historic. Like, where do you get the chairs from? And where do you get a pipe if you need a piece of pipe? I mean, so I was just kind of curious, where do y'all find the artifacts that you need to be able to make something authentic?
So there are a couple of things that we do. One thing is we are privileged to have a working relationship with the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
And so when you have an old ship that is being decommissioned, from time to time, we're allowed to have access to that vessel, and they will allow us to take parts that we may need. Now, this only works for older vessels because a lot changed in the 1950s. So, and the ship only served, she was decommissioned in January 1947.
Yeah.
So they have to be older vessels. And at one point, about a mile to 2 miles south of us, there was the vessel U.S.S. Shadwell. And she was a fire training ship for a number of years just south of us, but she was built for World War II. So everything on board the ship was pretty period correct. And when the Navy had decided it was time to recycle the ship, they allowed us to go over and get parts.
Oh, great.
So that's one option. We also worked recently with the Navy and with USS New Jersey with Ryan Zemansky, and with the Massachusetts and with the USS Iowa. The Massachusetts is one of our sister ships. And so we actually had these four vessels that were working together on the USS Charleston. And there were some Facebook posts about it that kind of followed that story and talked about that, where we went to Philadelphia. It was Dave, myself, and our curator, Shane McClain. And we went up there and we went to the USS Charleston. Now, the reason we went to the Charleston wasn't because she herself was a period vessel, but because the remaining spare parts for any battleships that the Navy had exist on the USS Charleston right now. And so what we did is we were going into the cargo hold, and it was these four vessels. It was BB 59, 60, 61, and 62. So these four vessels in a row. And we were all working together to try to find parts we needed for our ships. And we worked very closely with the other museum ships, especially Massachusetts, because she's our sister ship. And so we went up there, and it was helpful to be able to bounce ideas off each other. And there was a couple of instances where I found manuals and stuff that were specifically for USS Iowa. Well, that's great because BB 61 is there. And I can say, hey, guys, do do you guys want this? And they said, yeah. So it helped them out. It helped us out. Ryan and I found some Mark 8 computer parts. There's a nice video, not only on our channel, but also on the New Jersey's channel, talking about the Mark 8 computer. It was a nice bit of spares. And so we marked that for something that we wanted. We just found a lot of parts, but it's one of those things where you can't go down the street to the local parts house for your car and say, hey, I need some electrical, buses for a 1942 South Dakota class battleship. So that's it. That's the last of the spares for the U.S. Navy. Any spare parts for a battleship exist on the U.S.S. Charleston, and that's it. That's all that's left.
So you can, you and I were talking a little bit online about 3D printing. I mean, that would be exciting to me. That'll give y'all a way in the future to be able to recreate some parts and to be able to do it that way.
Right, and you can see there's a Facebook post about this as well. The 3D printing that we're doing. What we've done is we've purchased this 3D printer, and so far we've been test printing files on like say a 1911 because we can use that in any space on the entire ship, and we're just trying to see what we can do with it. But simultaneously, what we've done, we've been working with with Auburn University and Georgia Tech actually. But in this instance specifically, Auburn was down here, and we asked them, because they do a lot of 3D scanning. We said, "Hey, can you 3D scan some of these very rare artifacts that we have for USS Alabama?" And he said, it was Professor Junshen, and I'm probably going to say it wrong, but Liu, it's Liu. And he said, "Of course, we can work on this, and we can get together and we can help you on this." And so once they've made that 3D model of these rare parts, one of them literally we had one. That's it. And so what he does is he takes it out as a loan. There's paperwork so we can track it and everything. And he'll bring all that back. But once he makes that 3D model, he can then send the models to us. And then this item we had one of, well, now I can print an infinite amount.
Yeah.
In exacting detail. And what's interesting with that is that the more museum ships do that, the more we'll be able to help each other when we don't have a part. So, the goal is to, perhaps compile a library where we can all sample these things that we need and then just print out what we need.
I know when they brought back the Iowa class in the 80s when Reagan wanted to swell the size of the Navy, and they brought the Iowas back out of mothballs and put missiles on them and put new computers and everything else. There were some posts I noticed in museum ships for people that had actually worked on the Iowas, where they said they hit I-10 and came over to the Alabama and they took parts off. And now it's kind of like, do you ever get this temptation when you go on to the Iowa ships now, say, "Hey, can I have that back?"
Okay, so that's really funny, actually. So the Iowa and the Wisconsin were refit at Ingalls Shipbuilding in Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Yeah,
and those two vessels specifically, the U.S. Navy, the Alabama acted as a parts bin, because even in I believe it was 1982, 1983 when Iowa got refit in Ingalls. Even then, they had the same problem with parts. You couldn't go down and just get these parts for these battleships. They'd been built 40 years ago. So the South Dakotas, the North Carolinas, and the Iowas, those three classes of ships, all use the same systems. So you use the same radar control for your guns. You use similar systems for your engines. And so what ended up happening is that because Alabama had such a short career, she's essentially, material-wise, a brand new vessel, even if it's at the time she was 40 years old.
Yeah.
But our valves only had X amount of miles on them. So when they needed spare parts, they would use components from Alabama. And they also took components for the other vessels, the Missouri and the New Jersey. They took those parts from Massachusetts, and they took them from North Carolina. So there are parts of those ships all on the Iowa class ships And I like to joke that actually Alabama technically took part in 2 wars because parts of her went to the Persian Gulf with U.S.S. Wisconsin. But yes, that is kind of a joke I say kind of routinely to anyone I talk to from Wisconsin or from Iowa. I'm like, hey, by the way, you're not using them anymore. Can we have our parts back? And the answer is always, we'll check with the Navy and let you know. And, I'm still waiting. So
still waiting. Yeah. The phone might ring at any moment. I understand on that.
Yeah. Any moment.
Any moment. The history of the Alabama, though, I mean, World War II, and it had a unique history because it was in both the Atlantic and in the Pacific. It was it chased after the Tirpitz, which was one of the big German battleships. And obviously, everybody knows about the Bismarck because it was sunk nightly on the History Channel. It's like
right.
Yeah, Hitler. It was usually a Hitler documentary and one about the Bismarck every single night. But the Tirpitz was one that went after. It was in part of the Battle of the Atlantic. I love the videos of the ice on the turrets on the Alabama. Could you imagine going from that, then turn around and going to the South Pacific, and suddenly it's like 115 degrees and humid and so forth. But it had a really storied career and a really lucky career in the sense that they never really had any damage from enemy attacks, which was pretty amazing considering kamikazes and everything else during the war.
So she, along with a couple other battleships, it was pretty common for a battleship when it came out of the yard to do her shakedown cruise in the Atlantic, and then several other ships, I believe Washington, Iowa, and I'm certain there was a couple more, that when they came out of the yard and their first mission after shakedown was to operate with the British Home Fleet.
Yeah.
And the goal was we were offering them our 16-inch ships in support because of vessels, specifically Tirpitz, that was particularly thick-skinned. And Winston Churchill actually asked to have support from our 16-inch battleships to help kind of neutralize that threat. So Alabama, when she came out, she did her shakedown cruise in Casco Bay around Maine, and then came back into Norfolk, Virginia. And then she left from there with the South Dakota and some other vessels, including, it was a carrier, I want to say it was Ranger, but I could be wrong, and went to meet the British Home Fleet in basically in the Arctic. And she spent some time up there. They helped reinforce British forces in Svalbard.
Mm-hmm.
Probably saying that wrong, but and then they took part in Operation Governor, which was a majorly two-pronged attack. And Alabama was part of the force that essentially played the bait to try to lure out Tirpitz and Scharnhorst. However, the Germans did not take the bait. They had no interest in coming out and meeting an enemy force, even though the force that we were kind of fainting out ahead was something the Germans probably, we did it in such a way that we wanted the force small enough they felt they could handle it. But just over the horizon was a smaller force, or a larger force, I should say, with British battleships, with the U.S.S. South Dakota and some carriers, which would have rendered the German surface fleet inoperable, to say the least.
So basically, the first force was bait to try to pull it
out. We were that spear. Alabama went out first.
Yeah,
but Alabama could hold her own. There's a lot of debate on that, but ultimately the German Kriegsmarine decided not to come out of port, which a lot of people say, oh well, I wish these ships would have fought, and sometimes ultimately I look at it because I know some of the sailors. I'm like, well, I kind of like that they didn't, because I knew these guys, some of these guys, and anything can happen in battle. So I try to think of more. I think of the sailors as opposed to the ships fighting each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently took my son down to the National World War II Museum over in New Orleans, which, it's a great experience. And, I remember going down about 4 years ago, and there was a gentleman in a wheelchair talking to his family, and it maybe had 20 people sitting around. They were on the causeway, a little causeway that went out by the B-17, and he was explaining to them what he did in the war, and he was telling them about his friends and everything. And we went down afterwards to the gift shop, and there was a World War II veteran hat still there that was getting very dusty. And it made me really sad to realize that generation's fading away. And since you were, the Alabama was only a World War II, and the U.S.S. Drum, which is there also, the submarine, was a World War II. I think it was World War II only. I'm not sure. But anyway,
it served the training vessel after, but that's the only war he took part in.
Yeah, but it's like the men who served so proudly and bravely on the Alabama now are fading into history, and y'all have lost that. And I know that's tough. I love all the oral histories you have, and I noticed in the video that you've got several of them on there that really added so much to it. Are there still any of the crewmen that are still with us?
There are.
Yeah.
We still hear from some of them from time to time. We've lost a couple just this year, and it was upsetting for us because these were guys that came to the reunions every year, and so we knew them. Mr. Rosen, Mr. Wiegand, and they're just lovely, lovely individuals. You can actually see Mr. Wiegand in our video on the YouTube channel about the 5-inch mount.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, out of all the interviews we have and all the mini documentaries we've done with the oral histories, none of the gentlemen are still around, except for Mr. Wiegand was still around when the video was produced and put out. And it was just so wonderful to know that one of these men got to see what we put out. And he was about 99 at the time, and he passed away this year at 100.
Yeah.
And he got to see it, and his daughter said that he made him play it 3 times on the big TV. And so I guess we did right by him.
Yeah, I mean, I as much as I love the ship, and I love, like I said, crawling around it and seeing the history and reading the history and reading every plaque and everything else, those guys were its soul. And it's just so I love hearing their stories and so forth. And, part of, I think your mission is when y'all are restoring something or you're creating a display is to be able to bring their voices into it.
Absolutely. Just on the other side of that bulkhead, there is the captain's sea cabin.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because when we restored that, we actually contacted Captain Kirtland, Fred Kirtland. He was the only captain who commanded the Alabama in the Atlantic and in the Pacific.
Oh, wow.
So he's the captain that brought her through the Panama Canal. And he was revered by the men. The men spoke very highly of Captain Kirtland. What we managed to do was get a hold and, get in contact with Captain Kirtland's son. Mm-hmm. Well, Captain Kirtland was not a young man when he was the captain of the ship. And it turns out that his son was also in World War II. So we're talking to the captain's son, and he's in his 90s.
Yeah.
And it turns out he was actually a sailor on the South Dakota, the lead ship of the class.
Yeah.
And at one point, I believe when they were in the Atlantic serving together, like we were just talking about, he visited his father aboard Alabama. And so we got to talk to him, and we said, well, how did your father keep, his desk? How would he keep his things? He was very Spartan, very, very regimented. And so when we set up the compartment, we took that to heart. His desk is very sparse. And we even have photographs that were sent to us by his son. There's just 3 small photographs. And it's one of his son graduating the Naval Academy. It's one of his wife, and it's one of him and a cruiser captain on a beach they had just bombarded, kind of congratulating each other.
Oh, that's
so
cool.
And it's just it's just those little touches that we try to do. And there are through the years, we've had guys come back and tell us, this is where I stayed. This is where I stayed. And you'll see hints of that throughout the ship where we can tell a story. We try to, because like you said, it's not just the vessel, it's the men that took her to war, and not just war, but those who brought her home and operated on her after the war. And this was their home for a number of years.
Yeah, thousands of them. It's incredible. How many sailors? And I think it kind of grew during the war because when they added anti-aircraft guns, they actually added more people in. I think on one of the retrofits on that. But how many sailors were on the Alabama?
Roughly at her highest concentration, it was 2,500 men.
Wow.
Were on board the ship.
Yeah.
Which a lot for a 680-foot long vessel with a 108-foot beam.
Yeah.
So the quarters were a little cramped, but over the course of her career, she had about a little less than 7,000 men who were stationed on board the ship at one time or another.
I think a lot of people, we could get into the weeds about treaty battleships and about, after World War I and so forth.
Yeah.
And North Carolina, which was actually an older ship, was actually a little bit bigger. But to get around some of the treaty deals with the South Dakota-Class, they just made it more squat, I think, if I'm correct, so they could get more on that a little bit. But like I said,
throw more armor on.
Yeah, I mean, an Iowa-class battleship is longer, for instance, but they're all real narrow because they all had to get through the Panama Canal, and so it just makes for a really beautiful shape on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There were treaty limits. We'll just keep it brief about your displacement.
Yeah.
And so, in order to put more armor and keep the displacement low, they made the Alabamas about 50 feet, or the South Dakotas about 50 feet shorter than the North Carolinas. And usually when you have a longer hull, you tend to have an ability to go at higher speeds. So when they reduced the length of the vessel, they had to add 9,000 shaft horsepower to keep up that same 27, 28 knot speed of the North Carolinas.
Oh, wow.
So those are just small things that, they had to do that. Every bolt on the ship has a story. I'll say that.
I mean, that's the point about it. I mean, like I said, it's real easy to get into the weeds about this, and I would love to, just you and I someday when I come down there, I'd love to sit there and just chew the fat with you about it because I'm fascinated by it. But that said, the engineering that was done on a slide rule to create, the targeting computer is all analog, but they can literally lay a shell 23 miles away on a dime, and it's just fascinating the solutions that we did back then without the technology that we have today to be able to create it. And a lot of it's on display right there in the battleship. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy as an older person. As a kid, I love the guns and all this stuff like that. Now I'm just looking at it in complete admiration of the work and the craftsmanship that went into making it.
Well, there were a phenomenal amount of systems on the vessel that had to work together. And, when you look at Bureau of Ships, which is who designed the vessel, it's just an enormous room full of tables and men and women just hunched over these tables with slide rules and compasses and all sorts of things. And their job was to design this one thing. And then they all had to overall fit in this package to attain certain parameters, and just the number of systems that had to work together. And not just for war. I mean, this ship was a home. So it's not just about the guns and that kind of thing. It's also, these guys had a cobbler shop on board. They had to eat every day. They had to do their laundry. They had just any number of things you think that you would need to just get through everyday life. In 1942, these guys had aboard the ship. We had an ice cream stand, That
was one of the deals. I always loved that. Like this happened on carriers, but if like a pilot was crashed or was recovered by a destroyer, they had to send over ice cream over to the destroyer because they didn't have an ice cream machine, sort of thing. So living on a battleship did have its perks on that. You've done a really good job telling that story of the human side of things. And I mean, like I said, looking back now in the time that you've been there, how many restorations have you been and displays have you been a part of?
Anything I've done, I want to make sure I give due credit to Dave.
No, it's the team. When I say you, I mean the team. Yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble on that, but
it's been over 30 compartments.
Yeah,
and the displays are. I don't know. You just lose track. I think I've touched every single part of this ship that's on tour route, and most of it that's not on the tour route. About 20% of the ship's open to the public. And more recently, we've had a lot of the restoration work has been done by some of the maintenance crew, including a fellow named Chris Bryant, who has gone into Turret 3 and done an amazing job, and has also gone into our 5-inch mount that's open, and several other places. He's been working real hard at that to kind of, help take up some of the slack from where Dave and I, our responsibilities have grown. And not to say that we're not still doing that kind of thing. During the shutdown last year for COVID, or I guess 2 years ago almost now, during that shutdown, we spent a lot of time restoring a lot of parts of the ship.
How much did you say was open? What percentage?
About 20% of the ship is open to the public.
Wow. It's that. Yeah. I mean, I thought it was more because, I mean, you can cover a lot of ground in that ship. So what are some of the areas that are not open?
Most of the areas that aren't open are going to be storage areas.
Okay.
Which, nowadays a lot of these areas are just empty rooms with shelving.
Yeah.
You have magazines that you can't access, which are today just big empty compartments, handling rooms. 2 of the turrets you can't access the interior of.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get in the gun house, but you can't get through the barbette. You can do that.
Right. You'd have to go down one of the ladders. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So any place that is not viewable generally has to do with when you have to use a vertical ladder to get up and down.
Yeah.
Because, it becomes a safety issue.
Yeah, considering how many times I've hit my head, just because apparently everybody was a little bit shorter back then than they are.
They were, but I visited U.S.S. Kid recently.
Yes.
And she is much smaller, and I had to watch my head quite a bit more. So battleships gave you a little more room, but I do actually have just a small cut on my head right here from about 2 days ago. And you would think by now that I would be used to everything, but every once in a while, she reminds you. She tries to tell you don't get too relaxed.
The ship came down to Mobile in 1965, and of course, the park came with it at that point. And I mean, talk about that. And then the U.S.S. Drum was there, and of course, it was in the water, and now it's out of the water, which is really kind of y'all have got a really unique way to protect it and keep it up out of the water. So, because the way I understand it is a ship out of water, the water actually helps keep it kind of together, the pressure of the water. But the way you've got it sitting there, it's kind of neat because you can see all around and underneath it on that too. So when y'all are doing the restorations, you have airplanes that you have to take care of, you have artillery pieces, and then you had the recovery after Katrina, which you weren't a part of, but I mean, there was a lot of recovery that had to be done after that because it caused a lot of damage, particularly in the aircraft pavilion. So
it did.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not, y'all aren't just focused on the USS Alabama. The point is y'all are pretty busy because you've had 18 million people come through the park since it opened. That's a lot of visitors.
And counting
yes.
Constantly. We had a record year last year.
Oh, that's great.
And, technically the ship got here in 1964, opened in January 65. Drum got here in 1969. Drum had to be moved ashore for long-term preservation purposes. And that was far before I got here.
Yeah.
The 2 people who mostly take care of the drum are Tom Bowser and Leslie Waters. And they've just done a phenomenal job with drum on the interior, the exterior. There's a really good video that Ryan Zanansky did when he was here for HIMSA. I kept trying to chase him out. He kept doing all the videos. And I want to do these videos later. But he was just really hard to catch.
Yeah.
But but the drum, she was moved on shore. And the thing is that, so when we talk about hydraulic pressure from the ships, around it to help with supporting the hull, we're kind of, and this is something Ryan's talked about a lot. I know when you look at vessels like Victory over in England and stuff, you see a lot of those, you have these grading docks and have these shoring timbers that help put pressure on the hull. We don't, however, know entirely how a steel vessel, especially a battleship, with this is so heavily built. We don't know for sure. Some of us feel pretty strongly that you will get what you call pancaking, and I'm interested to see where it goes. We don't have a battleship that's out of water, so we don't know necessarily what the long-term condition is. Is that a possibility? Highly likely, but is it a certainty? We don't really know because no one's done it. So it's an interesting question, but because the ships are built so heavily, we've got a lot of structure, a lot of thick steel, but at the same time, there's a lot of weight up high. So you have these turrets, this armor deck, and it's a lot of weight pushing down. Mm-hmm. So, long term, I don't know what the situation would be, but as of now, there are no battleships in America that are preserved that way. There's the Mikasa in Japan, but she is in the ground essentially. And so she's got pressure on her sides. Yeah. There's a lot of discussion about how that is going to affect her long-term for preservation. Not so much the hull, but the inability to access the hull to address any potential corrosion problems. However, I'm not privy. I've never talked to their crew. They may have it well in hand. Everything is conjecture for me because I really don't know the ins and outs. Yeah. They may have a great drainage system. I'm not sure. But when I've talked about it, that's my concern, is an inability to access the hull to repair anything.
This is probably let me just ask you this question instead. What projects are y'all working on right now and you plan on working on over the next year?
Well, right now we are working on, like I mentioned earlier, an ordnance exhibit, and that's kind of taken center stage just now. We're also working on the YouTube channel. We're working on the 3D print project, and that's just the big things in front of us. We also have some more cases that are going to be put up on the main exhibit area. We're going to have to prepare those exhibits, and there's just always constantly something going on. And we have volunteers that kind of adopt certain compartments, and it's just kind of hard to say with any certainty what's next, or that's in there. There's a plan, and it's in the curator's head, and he doesn't tell me until we're ready to do it. So, he's definitely got a plan, and we have a layout of the ship on a kind of dry erase setup, right?
Yeah.
And when he got to the ship back in 2009, he color coded the areas, what needed attention first and what needs attention, kind of the least. And one of the last projects he wanted to kind of tackle were the turrets. Mm-hmm. He was going to try to get most of the ship restored on the interior, and then he was like, then I'll feel better about going to the turrets. Well, now we're in turret 3. Most of the superstructure has been redone by Chip Stewart and his wife and several of the other members of maintenance. So we are so far ahead of where we were in 2009 or even 7 years ago when I started, because like I said, we've done about 30 compartments, just Dave and myself and the maintenance crew. So we're definitely not resting on our laurels. Don't worry about that. We're not, we're very busy. I would tell you to keep an eye out on the social media pages. Mm-hmm. And there's big stuff always going on. Just keep an eye on it. I was talking to Rhonda earlier. We have a Life at Sea lecture series that's coming up in February. I had to take notes because, again, there's so many moving parts to this that, I can focus on my job. And then Rhonda's whole job is something completely different. And you have to have that diversification. But the Life at Sea lecture series, there's going to be past, present, U.S.S. Alabama Battleship Memorial Park. That's February 3rd. February 10 is not just names on a ship, preserving crewmen stories, which is, again, so very vital to what we do here. February 17th, U.S.S. Alabama in the North Atlantic. And on February 24th, Turret 3 Anecdotes and Restoration and Tour. And that's going to be with Chris Bryant, who did the restoration in there at the direction of Shane McCluney. And so there's that going on. We have LHC, the Living History Crew, which if you're going to come down and come visit and you want to sit down and talk and have me show you some stuff, that's great. I recommend doing it during a Living History drill where we have reenactors come down and they portray the ship's crew. We have 6 dates this year: February 19th, April 16th, June 4th, August 13th, October 1st, and December 3rd. So you have 6 times out of the year that you can come and watch a reenactment. And they're real good.
When doing a reenactment, of course, I know there's sometimes planes will come in and it's like you're being able to act like they're acting like they're firing at the planes and everything. Obviously, you don't fire the 16-inch guns. I think the people in Mobile would get mad at you if you did that sort of thing. But do you ever fire like a 5-inch gun or anything like that? So
right now, what we've got in place is the 20 millimeters. We have 3 of our 20 millimeter Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns outfitted to simulate fire with propane and oxygen.
Oh, that's cool.
And the 40 millimeter guns, the quad mount on top of Turret 3, is also been modified to fire propane and oxygen. No permanent modifications.
Yeah.
They can be these liners and stuff, and it can all be removed. No permanent modifications have been made. It's a historic vessel. This is a National Historic Landmark.
Yeah.
That's not the kind of thing that we do. So everything can be put back the way it was. But so 7 of our guns are outfitted to simulate fire, and they make a lot of noise, and they on a cloudy day, you can see a nice fireball coming out of them.
Yeah.
And we have local pilots who fly old Soviet era Yak trainers that do a really good job of looking like a Japanese torpedo bomber. And they make runs at the ship, and everyone gets to fire, and you simulate damage control, and you have H division, the hospital division, comes out and they pick up a casualty. And most of that's for show, because you're not depicting what happened on Alabama necessarily, because we never lost a man to enemy fire, never no injuries from enemy action. So, but it's just trying to give you an idea of what took place, what these guys went through in World War II. Because you'll be on the ship and you'll see the guys, they'll be hanging out and they'll maybe throwing some dice, or playing cards. And then usually around 1 o'clock, they sound general quarters and everyone runs to their battle stations. And so it just shows you that it could go from anything, relaxed on a day to combat at any moment. So, and sometimes you go to general quarters and you'd sit there for hours, and then they call it off and you go back and you never fired a shot. Combat is often described as hours of boredom punctuated with moments of pure terror. So,
where's your favorite spot on the ship?
It's funny. You might think I'm very fond of this area of the chart house, but one of my favorite areas is actually in the crewman memorial room. And it used to be the library on the ship. Today, when you walk in there, it is a series of panels, and it's got the name of every single sailor or Marine that was ever on board U.S.S. Alabama. And it's got music and proper lighting, and we have a kiosk in there now, so you can read biographies on some of the crew. Our historian, Todd Kramer, writes biographies on as many crewmen as he possibly can, which it's getting harder and harder to do that. Now we're having to talk to, sons and daughters and get those stories. But you also have the option, if you come in and you find Dad's name and, well, Dad doesn't have a biography. Well, you can send an email from the kiosk to Todd, so you can talk to him and you can help fill in the blanks, and Todd can do a biography. That's
cool. That really is cool. Well, obviously, I'm a little envious because you got a really cool job, but you really do. Of course, I mean, I draw pictures. That's not too bad either. But the fact that you get to go someplace you love every day and you're getting to keep the ship not only alive, but to be able to tell this story to future generations has to be very satisfying.
It is. It's an amazing opportunity that was afforded to me by Shay and our executive director, Janet Cobb. I'm grateful. I'm extremely grateful for it. If you mentioned earlier a muscle car. If anyone's restored a muscle car, well, a lot of folks they get an attachment to a machine. Oh, I love my car. I named my car this or that.
Yeah.
It's no different with a World War II battleship or submarine or a Cold War tank or anything else.
Yeah.
You get attached to them, and they have their own stories, and you develop a relationship with the vessels and the equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all, of course, like I said, a lot of Mississippians know the ship really well, just from either stopping by on their way to the beach or going and doing the overnight camp out or whatever as well. What's y'all's website?
Our website, you can find us online at U.S.S. Alabama, www.ussalabama.com.
Okay.
You can find us on Facebook, U.S.S. Alabama Battleship Memorial Park. You can find us on YouTube the same way, Twitter, Instagram. We have a great presence.
I mean, thank you so much for taking this time out today. I hope this has been fine. And I'm sorry to give you 6 promotions during the whole thing. And it's funny because I got an email from Rhonda just a minute ago. She and I have been tweeting back. She's always retweeting my tweets and stuff like that. So I'm a big fan of what y'all do, obviously. But I mean, I just appreciate the job that y'all have done to help. Because like I said, the ship is in just incredible shape. And in the last few years I've been there, I can just see the progress that you're making on, kind of updating it for the 21st century. And it's been really, y'all have done a great job. And I just wanted to talk to you today to be able to say thank you. And, here we are, like I said, we're coming into this point where we're losing the generation that fought World War II. And I think that story still needs to be told. And I'm glad y'all are doing it.
Well, I thank you, and anybody who comes by and just appreciates the ship, appreciates the story, appreciates the men who came before us, the men and women. Only the men served on the ship, but a lot of women worked in the yards, in the shipyards, to help build ships. They transported aircraft. There was just everyone was involved in the war effort.
Yeah.
All the way down to little Billy pulling a wagon with, scrap metal and his old comic books to donate to the war effort, So the whole nation was involved in it. And so, as much as we talk about the men who served and everything, which will owe a debt that we can never repay, but the whole country really came together during World War II to really do something special.
Yeah, definitely. And Mobile was such a Navy town during the war too. And it's I think it's very appropriate. I'm glad that the citizens of Alabama got the ship all those years ago. And I'm glad y'all are taking care of it so well.
Well, thank you. And, again, anyone who comes by, Alabama, we're funded through what we call coming through the gate.
Yeah.
So the more people who come and see her, the more money we have to restore and do new exhibits and do all sorts of wonderful things. And so it helps everybody. It helps the visitor who gets to appreciate the ship and kind of step back in time and see what life was like. And it helps us because we can restore the ship, and it's just so important. And if we're lucky, we get people that they want to come volunteer their time and their special skills and that kind of thing. So it's just it's a cultural icon. Everyone can come here and we can all agree, and it's wonderful and it's just such a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, it really is. It's just breathtaking to be able to walk through and see it and everything. And once again, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
Me too. I've never actually done an interview like this. Thank God Rhonda kind of grabbed me this morning. She's like, okay, she prepped me to kind of help me out because, like I said, I've never done one of these. So
no, it was great. It was just great. And it's like I could have probably picked a lot of folks, I guess, but I mean, I really love the fact that you're also from Mississippi too, and I wanted to throw that out there, and because that's what we do with Mississippi Stories. But I like focusing on people that have got really cool jobs and have great stories to tell, and you're definitely out there telling a great story. So thank you.
Oh yeah, no, like I said, thank you, and it's not. Dave is from Gulfport.
Cool. Well, there you go. Well, if I'd have known that, I'd have drug him in there too on that.
Well, unfortunately, Dave, he's not here today. So
yeah,
but Dave's a more private guy. But maybe if you talk real nice to him, you can get him to talk to you sometime.
Okay, very good. Well, Matt, thanks so much. And like I said, just folks, it's really a great experience, and check it out. So thank you again.
No, thanks.
All right. Thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.